to Module 1, an overview of online learning and teaching. So the objectives for this video, we're going to define online learning and then identify key components of teaching online. So let's dive right into that, defining online learning. So what is online learning? Online learning is any learning that is done in an online environment. I know this is a huge definition, so let's break it down even more. We have fully online, which is considered 80% to 100% online. So you still might meet some face-to-face, but more than likely if you're fully online, you're not meeting face-to-face. And then you have blended learning, which is 30% to 80% online. This doesn't mean that work that you do in class or in a face-to-face setting that's online can't be considered part of that 30 to 80%. It just means that 30 to 80% of the interactions are done online. Whenever we look at this, the reading brings this out as far as this continuum of no technology all the way through fully online. So that no technology face-to-face is a very traditional classroom setting. Blended, you're in a classroom setting where you have other people around you, but you're also using technology. And then you have fully online. Also understand that within blended learning, there are a lot of different variations, like the flipped classroom is considered a blended learning model. But really, blended learning is anything that's 30 to 80% technology use or online interaction. So let's move into some of these best practices for online teaching. Online teaching should focus on a learner-centered instruction. Now, whenever we talk about teaching with somebody that's not in the profession, one thing that comes to mind is this, where the teacher is at the front, they're giving information, writing on the board, answering student questions, things of that nature. But whenever we look at online learning, it looks more like this. Now, I know this is face-to-face right here, but this right here is considered learner-centered instruction, where students are collaborating and working together to learn about a topic. It's not the person at the front, the teacher at the front, giving information. The student sits there and they collect information. This is very much a learner-centered instruction. And for online learning, it has to be this way. Even if we're talking about blended learning where it's 30 to 80% online, having something that's learner-centered is crucial. So let's look at this whole idea of teacher-centered versus student-centered. We have with teacher-centered kind of a low level of student choice. Student has no choice whenever the teacher is up there giving information, and the student's just sitting there. They're passive and sitting there and collecting the information. Now, on the flip side, with a student-centered classroom or even environment, even if it's online, there's a high level of student choice, but the student isn't just sitting there collecting information from the teacher, they're actively engaged in the information. And one thing that I can tell you is that with learner-centered instruction in an online environment, it is a highly effective strategy. If you try to implement teacher-centered learning in online, it's not particularly effective because either you have to rely on a long video lecture where students are watching you and taking notes, or it's something that is unengaging to the student, and the student is less likely to actually do the work if we don't engage the student. The next piece is being social. It's important in an online environment to even be social with the student. And by social, we don't mean that you get on social media and talk to students, but as far as communication, we have to be on top of it with an online environment. Timely communication is crucial to the student feeling connected to the class. In a fully online environment, this is important because it's possible they may not know anybody else in that course. So communicating with the student in a timely manner is important. If you get an email from a student and you think about replying 2 or 3 days later, then chances are they're not really going to feel connected into that course. Also, actively engage in the course. If you see something that piques your interest in a discussion, then feel free to chime in. The instructor shouldn't drive the activity, they shouldn't drive the discussion, but feel free to be a member of that discussion and give your input on it, especially if it's something that you know you can actively engage in. Within the blended learning model, if we're talking about active engagement, you're probably in a classroom and hear these conversations or see this work being done, and that would be a perfect time to actively engage so that you have a social presence even within that online activity. And then encourage collaborative learning. Encourage students to communicate with each other online to solve these problems. Now, we have the flip side of that where we worry about students copying each other and talking to each other just about the answers, but that's why we have to encourage collaboration. Collaboration is something different than just talking to your friends. So that part we really need to focus in on and make sure students understand what it means to be collaborative within class, not just talking to other students, but actually collaborating. As far as expectations, we need to make sure that we set expectations early. The earlier the better. We do this if we have a physical classroom. It's normally one of the best practices to set your expectations within the first few days of class starting. So even in an online environment, it's important to set these expectations early. And then have clear expectations. Make sure that your expectations are clear not just to you, but to other people. And if you have questions about that, have somebody else read your expectations. That way that can clear up any of those things that might be a little bit confusing to your students. In blended learning, you have a little bit of leeway because you will meet face-to-face and you can discuss these things, but in a fully online course, you have to be clear with your expectations because you don't want to come up to a due date and a student kind of doesn't quite understand what your expectations are as far as late work or when things should be done. With feedback, we need to make sure that we provide timely feedback. In a face-to-face class, we would sure want to give feedback timely and make sure the student had that. In an online course, it's no different, even within blended learning. Make sure to get feedback to the student. This doesn't mean give them a grade. Grades are a type of feedback, but if it's in class and you're having an online discussion, even giving feedback throughout that is important. But especially if it's going to be something that you assign a grade to or give other feedback to, just make sure that it's done in a timely manner. And then gather student feedback. Early on in the course, it's a good idea to make sure to get student feedback on kind of how they see things going. This is helpful so that you can improve the quality of the course that you have. Even within a blended environment, it's important to make sure that we really understand what the learner needs and try to provide what the learner needs. Some things to consider. Now, these aren't considered best practices, but they're things that are important whenever we look at online learning. We need to make sure we understand what devices the students have access to. We don't want to give them material that they can't access. So one thing that I can think of as an example, some material can't be accessed from a mobile device. If you know that's all your students have access to, you probably need to find something else for them. Tech support. If you know you can't help them with tech problems, make sure you know who can. It's not that you have to be the expert at the technology. You just have to know who to contact or how to tell your students to go about getting help for that. And then provide a variety of resources throughout. Don't just stick with one reading or one video. Provide that variety throughout class so that students can really, have their needs met as far as how they learn best. Finally, let's go through some of the supplemental resources, and I'm just going to quickly tell you about these things. The best practices in online teaching strategy. This is a little bit longer of an article. That's why I didn't include it in the weekly reading. So if you really want to know more information on online teaching, it's a great resource for that. And then blended learning. If you want to know more about blended learning, this is a great video. It's a little over 5 minutes, but it's well worth the watch. If you have any questions about any of the content this week, feel free to contact me.